Okay, can everyone hear me? Good. So my name is Mark Goddard. I'm the PTL of the Kolla project for the train cycle, and M. Goddard on IRC. The Kolla Mission, I'm sure many of you have heard it before, but the mission is to provide production-ready containers and deployment tools for operating OpenStack clouds. Oh. That's exciting, isn't it?
Is that on your screen as well?
It looks good down there. And this one as well.
It looks good there.
Yep. Need to tweak a cable or something. Yeah, well, I'll carry on. This is just an intro in here. So Kolla was founded in the Kilo cycle, joined the Big Tent, which is no longer a thing, but back then it was a grouping of projects. It was the this was in the Liberty cycle.
I'm sorry, the resolution on your computer, is that
So one of the nice things about the Kolla project, I think, is that it's got a very diverse user base and a contributor base. It's not really a project that's driven by a single vendor. It's got support. It's volunteer-driven. Lots of different companies from different parts of the world, all driving this one project. We had quite a large number of contributors, 135 in Stein cycle. And in the last user survey, I think these numbers are a little out of date, but we had 125 Kolla Ansible deployments and 25 using just the images. There are three parts to the Kolla project. We've got the Kolla itself, which is a set of container images. And those images are used by both OOO and Kolla Ansible. We've got Kolla Ansible, which is an Ansible-based deployment tool to deploy those images. And we have a CLI called Kolla CLI, which is Python-based. And it's currently a little under-maintained. I think unmaintained is probably a better way of describing it. So if anyone wants to use that or is using it, please do help out. So we'll start with Kolla. We have a number of new features in the Kolla project for the Stein cycle. Oh, 1 minute. You can't see anything that's going on there, can you? Okay. So, Kolla images features in Stein release. We have the Debian Buster release supported. We've got Python 3 coming down the pipe. In the train release, all OpenStack projects will move to supporting Python 3 only, I believe. So we need to get moving with this, and we started adding some features to help us out with that. And a key driver there is the Ubuntu Stein Cloud Archive, which is now a mix of Python 2 and 3 packages, which is an interesting problem. And we know that CentOS 8 and RHEL 8 will also be Python 3 only. So we anticipate those coming out hopefully before the train release. So we should be able to support those in train, although I'm not affiliated with Red Hat, so I can't say that for sure. We have some cross-project CI jobs, so we can test the OOO flavored Kolla images, both on CentOS and Fedora, and have those results posted back to any Kolla change in Gerrit. We've got a bunch of new images. We've got one for the placement API. Placement was extracted from Nova during the Stein cycle, so we made a new image which uses this new project. We have an extra backup image, which we use for taking backups of the MariaDB database, and a OOO client image, which is used in OOO for performing interactive and automated commands. Some more images. We support Prometheus in Kolla, and there's a project called mtail, which can be used to take metrics from log files or from logs and post those into Prometheus. So we have an image that contains the MTail project. Nascar has its own fork of Grafana for reasons that I won't go into here. Essentially, it's to add Keystone integration, which has been blocked upstream in Grafana. And we got a new set of images for Cyborg. Cyborg is a service for managing hardware accelerators in OpenStack. The images are currently in a tech preview state, so they've not been tested against any actual hardware accelerators as far as I'm aware. Things that we'd like to do in the train cycle. The main thing that we certainly need to do is support these Python 3 services that are coming down the pipe. And we need to do that both for source and binary images and for each of the different distributions that we support. Some work was started in the Stein cycle to support Nascar, which is a service for adding high availability support for Nova instances. I'm hoping that will be finished in the train cycle. And perhaps your feature, whatever that may be, could be added as well. On to Kolla Ansible. We completed the work that was started in the Rocky cycle to add support for Nascar. We were really hoping to get that done in the Rocky cycle, but it was a huge chunk of work and we didn't quite finish it. That said, Doug, the guy that implemented it, is looking at backporting all of those patches that made it work from Stein into Rocky, as I know some people are interested in having that work in Rocky, including us. We added the tooling to deploy the extracted placement container. We also needed to add some scripting to migrate from using the Nova database to using a separate placement database, and adding the separate placement users in Keystone and the databases and etc. We added support for taking database backups using the extra backup image, and this is implemented as a new Kolla Ansible subcommand, a new action called MariaDB backup. And what this does is runs a container mounting the same MariaDB volume and uses extra backup to take either a full or an incremental backup of the database and stores that in a separate Docker volume. So what we don't do is any scheduling of that backup. That's something that you would have to do using external tooling. We also added support for the Docker Community Edition, Docker CE. This is something that's been fairly overdue in Kolla Ansible because the previous release of Docker was limited to 17.05, I think, which is now getting about 2 years old. So not great for security updates and things like that. So we've added support for deploying from this new Docker repository and package repositories, and making sure that the upgrade from one to the other is smooth and that you can actually deploy the new Docker package and make sure that it starts up the new services correctly, which it didn't automatically do, surprisingly. We've got deployment tooling for the new Cyborg images, again, tech preview state. And we had a few small changes to simplify the deployment of Ironic in a standalone mode. So you run Ironic in a similar way to Bifrost without any supporting services such as Nova or Keystone, Glance, etc. We've made this a bit more easy to do by adding a new flag and making some of the configuration a little more automatic. The nice thing about this versus Bifrost is that you can add those services back in one by one as you want. So if you decide that you do want to use Glance or Keystone, then you just enable those flags and up those services pop. You also get high availability, scalability, all the things that you're used to having in Kolla Ansible. We added some rolling upgrade logic for Neutron, Nova, and Swift. All good?
Okay.
Great.
So that's
Thank you.
that.
All right, sure. I'll check this. Okay, hopefully your eyes are feeling a little less strained now. Yeah, so rolling upgrades for Neutron, Nova and Swift. So to be clear, this isn't zero downtime yet. There still is a short amount of downtime when you roll the containers because we do it on every single host at the same time. But we have the proper procedure in place to do the online data migrations and contractions and expansions of the database and all those things at the right place at the right time. We do have some plans to make it completely zero downtime. I think we're at a point where you're probably going to get maybe a second or two. If you've pulled the images in advance of downtime, then it's up to you how big of a problem that is, but I know some people would like completely zero downtime. We have some dedicated networks for migrating instances and Octavia. And we made a lot of improvements to the CI jobs. So we now have a test for testing upgrades from one release to the next. You might ask why we didn't have this previously, and yes, so did I. But it's definitely a good thing to have. We've got a good NFV scenario which actually tests quite a few different projects and glues them together. So thank you to Eduardo for adding that. And we have a test for Zune. I know we'll be adding quite a few more test cases in the train cycle. Some things we might want to do in train. Again, we need to deploy those Python 3 images. Probably won't be too many changes in Kolla Ansible there, but no doubt there will be some. A big feature that we'd like to add is support for Nova cells. There's been some work started on this by the team at GoDaddy. We have Doug from my team who's written a spec to try and look at the big picture and work out the best way to do it. And hopefully we can bring all those things together in the train cycle. Again, Nascar, we need playbooks to deploy that service. A common complaint of Kolla is that it doesn't support TLS everywhere, and it's a legitimate complaint. So there are various patches in flight at the moment to do some of these things. I think some of them need work, but I think train will be the cycle where we actually tidy them up and get them merged, because I think it's a bit of a problem at the moment. So we have RabbitMQ, the internal API network, and libvirt, and all of those things have patches in flight. There was a cross-project goal called upgrade checkers in the Stein cycle. The idea being that each different project can add a new command that they can use to check whether their service is ready for upgrade or has been upgraded successfully. So the deployment tooling needs to support this, and that's something that we can do. In train, I've put up a patch that starts in this direction. It wasn't clear to me whether you run this before the upgrade or after the upgrade. I went with before, apparently it's after. I was expecting it to be more of a sort of a pre-flight check thing, but apparently it's a post-flight check, which sounds a little odd, but no. Hopefully will be useful and should tell you whether your upgrade went well. We hopefully will add some more test coverage. We have quite a few patches in flight at the moment. We've got a test for Nascar, a test for MariaDB, exercising those backup and recovery features that we have at the moment. And I just wanted to focus a little on the Nascar feature, because it is quite a big one. Nascar is a scalable, highly available multi-tenant monitoring and logging service. It's pretty complicated. There's a lot to it. It has many dependencies, many different services, both within Nascar and outside of it. It's got Python services, Java dependencies, Scala, Go, everything. One of the nice things, I think, that we found about deploying with Kolla Ansible was that the model that we have meant that you could just treat each of these things in the same way. It's the container model, really, but we had all the existing patterns that we needed to deploy this complicated beast and make it work, hopefully, more reliably than it would otherwise. Just to give you a flavour of the complexity we're talking about, this is a diagram that my colleague Doug drew. So we're reusing some of the existing components in Kolla Ansible. We've got the SQL database, Elasticsearch, Influx was already there, HA proxy, and I think Kafka was already there, and of course Fluent and Grafana. But we've got these new Nascar services in the middle. And it's a bit of an eye test. There's, I'd recommend grabbing these slides. I will share them somewhere after the talk. And just get a feel for how it works, because it does glue things together quite nicely, I think. And lastly, a plea for help. Kolla is a community project. It's maintained by operators. We have a core team, which is not full-time. Nobody on the project is full-time. We do as many reviews as we can, but inevitably the bandwidth of that team is limited, like every other project. We have a number of contributors who contribute less frequently, which is great. I think the project has enough momentum to survive. It's got to the point where it's relatively stable. It's got a large user base, people who depend on it. It's got a decent core team. I think what would be great is if people could step up their contributions to the project to help it really thrive. So perhaps you could consider some of these things, like if you log into Gerrit, you can add a watch on different projects. And so one of the things that I started doing when I was first reviewing was to add a watch for new patches. So anytime someone submits a patch to the project, you get an email, and if it's of any interest to you, you take a look. If you don't, then ignore it. So it's a bit of a fire hose, but it's manageable. We would appreciate help in reviewing and testing out neat features, and particularly as we get to the end of a release candidate, just to make sure that everything is working as it should be. We've got a huge range of services that get deployed by Kolla Ansible, and we can't test them all in CI. So if you use something that's a little bit more exotic, please do test it towards the end of the release. Join the IRC channel, OpenStack Kolla. We have weekly meetings at 3 p.m. UTC on Wednesdays. We're having a virtual PTG. We haven't scheduled it yet, but I expect it to be within the next month, 5-6 weeks perhaps. There's a doodle poll, there's an Etherpad here. Please do sign up and submit things that you'd like to talk about, if you have any. And lastly, we have an onboarding session today for the Kolla project at 1:40. So I'll expand on these details and give more of an overview of the architecture of the project and how the code base is laid out and that kind of thing. So, thank you. Any questions?
So that Kolla Ansible has a kind of more different way of using the container environment, as opposed to like as the now the orchestration layer of Kubernetes taking steam from a native Docker D model. So how do you see that affects your, because you're invested more heavily in the Docker D kind of model.
Yep.
And then you have built toolchain on top of it. So how that you see effect, and also the other question, how that affects you and how you see in the future that's having a problem or not. The second question is the scale part.
Okay, so the first question about the deployment model using Docker rather than Kubernetes. It's a common question. Kubernetes does seem to have won the orchestration game, and we're using an unusual model. It's slightly different. The thing I would say is that I'm still sold on this model. It's not perfect, but I think it does have the benefits of containerization without the complexity of Kubernetes, because OpenStack is complicated enough without putting another slippery eel underneath. So just keep it simple. Ansible is about as simple as you can get in terms of orchestration. And we're using the parts of Docker that really help the problems that we used to have with OpenStack deploying without Kubernetes, without containers, slip of the tongue, such as dependency management, scalability. And I think some of the choices that Kolla's made, like turning off the container networking, just using host networking, really keeps it simple. So you don't have this mass of bridges that you have to work around, and it really is just a way of isolating services and being able to roll them out. And the second question, sorry, remind me. Scale, okay. The honest answer is I'm not sure. I'm aware of deployments that run into the hundreds. I know people have had problems with going into the high, sort of 300 mark. It's something that we have in our sites, my company in particular. We've got some fairly big deployments coming up. So hopefully that won't be a problem for long if it is a problem. There were some, I remember, I think a couple of PTGs ago, I was speaking to someone about some problems they were having with fact gathering. And these aren't insurmountable problems. I looked into it and it was just an n-squared problem when fact gathering. So it was a bug, it got fixed, we moved on. Hopefully, it will improve as we try these larger and larger deployments.
So sorry, how that got fixed? The n-squared problem?
So, not wanting to deep dive too much, but it was if you're using the limit argument to limit to a subset of hosts, and there was then some algorithm that was gathering facts from all of the hosts, but it was ending up doing gather facts from every host for every host. Do you see what I mean? So it was just a silly algorithm, but easy enough to fix. I think the model fundamentally doesn't have any scaling problems. There will be practical issues and things that you need to do to make it work well, having a local registry that runs fast and things like that. But Ansible itself has been proven to scale to pretty high numbers, so you just have to use it the right way. Hopefully that answers. So.
Do you have an experience with alternative Docker runtimes, like CRI or
No, sorry. No, haven't tried that. But would be interested to hear if anyone has. Please feedback.
You mentioned a lot of the contributors are operators themselves. Would you say that they use it in their production environment or
Yep.
real production environment operators?
Yep. Obviously not everyone is. Some people are still starting out, but there are definitely many production clouds built on Kolla and Kolla Ansible. I think there are probably lots of different ways to do this. If you have your own provisioning system in-house, if you're at that kind of scale, then using that should be fine. I'm going to do a shameless plug of my own project, which is Kobe, which solves this problem. It goes from the point, it uses Ironic and Bifrost to get from the point of having just a single host to provisioning the control plane, and then hands over to Kolla to finish the job.
I intend to join that session.
So there is a user feedback session tomorrow, I think, but there's no onboarding. It's not an official project yet. Hopefully we'll be in the train release if I get my way, but we'll see how that goes. Anyone else? I think everyone's looking hungry. I'll let you go.